For my project, I want my students to be able to draw a connection between self expression through a historical art piece by Rembrandt. And so I have here a picture, a self portrait of Rembrandt at the age of 63. And it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but I also put a picture of it in my PowerPoint. And what I want the children to do is to be able to look at that portrait without any sort of background information and to just write down what they see, what colors they see, what they think the artist was maybe thinking himself when he painted his self portrait, lines, shapes, things like this, and to also write down how the portrait makes them feel. Is it something that's scary, or does it make them feel calm? Maybe it doesn't make them feel anything at all. And then after this, they are going to read a poem by, let me bring up the author's name. Oh, yeah, and also they're going to be writing down those feelings and impressions and what they see on a piece of paper. And then afterward, they're going to compare it to a poem by Elizabeth Jennings. Now, she wrote this poem a couple hundred years later, and she actually wrote this poem about the portrait. So she's writing what she sees and how she feels when she looks at the portrait. And the children are going to compare their thoughts and emotions and what they recorded on their piece of paper to what Elizabeth Jennings wrote. Now, after they do this, they are going to they have one of two options, or I guess a couple of different options. Either they are going to do their own self-portrait if they would like, or they can choose a famous portrait done by some sort of historical artist. And in this, it doesn't have to be a self portrait, but just at least a portrait. And they're going to take this portrait and they're going to write down what they see, how the portrait makes them feel, and their thoughts and emotions. And then I want them to turn those thoughts and emotions into some sort of narrative. It can be a poem, prose, or as I said, just some sort of narrative. So for my example, I chose a classic. I chose, if you can see, the Mona Lisa, which is, one of my favorite portraits of all time. And what I did is I took a piece of paper and I wrote down some of my emotions and what I saw. So I noticed that in the portrait, she isn't smiling with any teeth. She doesn't have any eyebrows. I noted some of the colors are like browns and greens and blues. And also, I noted that the portrait seems sort of unfinished. And it makes me almost feel like she has a secret. When I see that look on her face, it feels like she has a secret. And so I took those thoughts and emotions from that famous portrait and I turned it into a poem. So I'm going to read that poem. And this is titled The Mona Lisa. What secrets she hides, I cannot tell, for her eyes laughed at something I know not. Hands folded primly, like she is waiting for someone. Perhaps the artist, a friend, her husband. Who knows? Her skin has a green tinge, and she lacks brows as well. Is she sick? Has time been unfriendly to her painting, no less? She makes me feel calm, but also that I want to get to know this mysterious woman. I wonder what she is thinking. She looks intelligent, and she must have been educated. I feel like she had money. So maybe she's sitting there, pondering a philosophical question. Or maybe she's reviewing the latest information that she read in the newspaper, or perhaps her favorite novel. She is young and beautiful, and makes me think that her life might be fun, modeling for the famous Da Vinci. Her brown hair parted perfectly, and her curls hanging to her shoulders. The rich folds in her green dress and the cloth around her speaks of a woman of power and wealth. Was she going to a party? Who knows? The background seems false, and the overall portrait almost unfinished, with no color in her cheek or paint on her lips. I wonder if she knew that her portrait would be one of the most famous of all time, the Mona Lisa. And so those were just my thoughts and impressions when I saw that portrait. I didn't make it too long, but that's what I want the kids to do, to just be able to look at a piece of art and, learn about history through art and, tell how that makes you feel. Because I feel like art is a great form of self expression. And I feel like being able to learn how people in the past, how historical figures were able to express themselves through their art, through their poetry, and through their visual art and through their paintings, being able to see how they were able to express themselves will help the students be able to gain their own voice through their art. And they'll be able to see that, well, if they could find a voice through their art, then maybe I can find a voice through my art and I can be more confident in myself. And so that's the goal of my lesson.